With the Gosho, reply to Hakiri Saburo on page 405 of volume 1 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. This is a prelude to chapter 10 of the opening of the eyes lecture. We'll do that This is a great Gosho. I'm going to start out by reading the background first, as always, so that we understand. Okay, here we go. This is right before reply to Kyo and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so this letter was written on the 8th month of 1273 in Ichiwasara Sato in response to doubts raised. Now, what is the opening of the eyes about, right? Everybody paying attention to me now? Okay, what's the opening eyes? The opening of the eyes is to explain to his disciples why he's having to go through what he's going through, and that the fact that he's not being protected and absent of all this difficulty does not negate in any way his true identity as votary of the Lotus Sutra, right? Right. Okay, so he says, this letter was written in response to doubts raised by Hakiri Rakuro Saburo, also known as Nambu Rakuro Saburo. Hikiri Saburo is thought to have been a son of Hikiri Shinanaga, the steward of Minobu, the district where the Daishonin lived in his later years. Saburo had asked why the Daishonin, who called himself a votary of the Lotus Sutra, had been undergoing so many difficulties when he should have been enjoying peace and security as promised in the Lotus Sutra. He was by no means the only one to entertain this doubt. A number of the Daishonin's disciples had been badly shaken by the Tatsunokuchi persecution in the Sato exile, right? That's why we're reading this whole Gosho. That's why this is a great Gosho to read as a supplement, because the Daishonin is going to answer his questions specifically. Saburo also asked whether one Saburo also asked whether one could not, to a certain extent, attain the Buddha way through the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings. Obviously, that is a no to that question. The Daishonin answers the first question by citing passages from the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras predicting how difficult it will be to propagate the correct teaching, and by referring to the historical examples of people who met with persecution for the sake of Buddhism. The Buddha himself foretold that the votaries of the Lotus Sutra are bound to encounter opposition and hostility. The Daishonin declares that his trials demonstrate that he is in fact the votary of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law. He then briefly reviews the sequence of propagation of the Buddhist teachings in the former, middle, and latter days of the law, and declares that the time has come for Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the supreme law, implied in the depths of the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, to spread throughout the world. So again, until he brought forth the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, it had only been implied. No one knew what that law was that's talked about in the 2nd and the 16th chapters. Concerning the second question, he says that the familiarity with Buddhist terms is necessary. Concerning the second question, he says that familiarity with Buddhist terms is necessary, and encourages Saburo to ask the Daishonin's priest disciples to help resolve his doubts. So in other words, he says, without study there can be no Buddhism, right? That's basically what he's saying. Yeah. So it's not enough just to have faith. You must persevere for the sake of yourself and others to perceive and understand the teachings correctly so that you can convey them to others correctly. Starting on page 405, reply to Hakiri Saburo. In Kamakura, there are humble priests named Chikugobo, Acharya Bin, and Acharya Dashin. Please send for them, show them respect, and hold discussions with them. I will explain and outline the important teachings. They are somewhat familiar with the great law that has not yet been propagated in Japan, and therefore you should pursue your studies under them. Everybody's with me? Yeah. No wonder I can't. These are the wrong glasses. In your letter, you write, it's okay. The other ones are upstairs. In your letter, you write as follows. As soon as your letter reached me, the doubts that I had previously entertained were swept away just as a strong wind blows away the layers of clouds and the bright moon comes into view. For people of the present age, however, whether high or low, these teachings are difficult to believe. That is because the Lotus Sutra promises that those who practice the Buddhist teachings will enjoy peace and security in their present existence and good circumstances in future existences. If this is so, then why is it that the priest Nichiren, though he calls himself a votary of the Lotus Sutra, should meet with so much persecution? People are saying that it must be that he is untrue to the Buddha's will. Now you understand? So Hakiri is like first of all, he's a samurai. So he's being very straightforward. He's saying, when I read what you had written, my understanding expanded to the point that the hair stood up on my arms. I finally got it. And it seems like you get it too. But I'm confused because if you get it, why are you going through what you're going through? I'm not understanding something. Can you explain this to me? Nichiren is saying, this is so deep, a single letter from me is not going to answer your question. You need to hook up with my disciples. I believe that Acharya Bin, I believe that's Nico Shoni. Okay, so he's saying, hook up with my disciples who have been studying under me and that have a more clear understanding of this than you do. And hopefully they'll be able to, thank you so much, dear. Hopefully they'll be able to make this clear to you. You can actually ask them questions and have a dialogue. I'm in Minobu. It's kind of difficult for you to write a letter and then I got to write a letter back and you got to write a letter, okay? So he's saying, with regard to these unjust criticisms, that what he's doing must not be in keeping with the Buddha's will. However, the persecutions I have encountered are due to my karma. Due to my karma from past existences. There is no need to be surprised at my having incurred the wrath of the government authorities. By the way of explanation, if you examine the text of the Lotus Sutra, you will find it stated that in the latter day of the law, when people practice the Lotus Sutra as it teaches, they are bound to meet with many persecutions, right? This is from the Encouraging Devotion chapter, the 3 powerful enemies, right? Yeah. This is made perfectly clear in the text, and anyone who has eyes need only look to see what is there. So everybody keeps going back to this peace and security in your present existence, but in fact you're missing the point because we're in the latter day of the law. Okay? We're not predicting enlightenment for people of the former or the middle day. Do you understand? Thus, for example, the 4th volume of the Lotus Sutra says, since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world, then how much more so will this be after his passage? And the 5th volume reads, it will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to believe. It also says there will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us and will attack us with swords and staves, with rocks and tiles. And it continues, in that evil age there will be monks with perverse wisdom, or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement. They will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possessed the 6 transcendental powers. Because in the midst of the great assembly they constantly try to defame us, they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders, as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us. Evil demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. Again and again we will be banished. Now, does everybody remember what that's from? That's from the encouraging, those are the key points to the Encouraging Devotion 20-verse line, or 20-line verse section. That is the section that, again, you need to familiarize yourself with this. All right? That's where they talk about the 3 powerful enemies, right? I just read this to you 2 weeks ago from the Lotus Sutra, right? Okay. So the Nirvana Sutra says there are Ichkantikas, or people or persons of incorrigible disbelief. They pretend to be arhats living in deserted places and speaking slanderously of the correct and equal sutras of the great vehicle. When ordinary people see them, they all suppose that they are true arhats and speak of them as great bodhisattvas. It also says, after the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of it has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, but they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras, and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen, who, narrowing their eyes, stalk softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice. The Parinirvana Sutra states, there are also Ichkantikas who resemble arhats, but who commit evil deeds. Now what is he? Now, so what has he just done here? Okay. First of all, Hikari has said, what gives? Why aren't you being protected? And then the Daishonin has gone through and just quoted all kinds of passages from the Encouraging Devotion chapter, from other sections, stating all this stuff that has to do with opposition for those that propagate the law in the latter day. Right? Okay? And the law itself is never described in the sutra. Well, the Daishonin has now come forth with a teaching that says that this law is called Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and that it's now the latter day and it's the time for it to be propagated. So the Buddhism of the sowing has actually spawned, has started to give rise to itself. Do you follow? He says, so now, so the Daishonin continues to Hikari after all of these quotes of reference. Now when I hold up this bright mirror of the sutra texts and turn it toward the country of Japan, all is reflected there without the slightest obscurity. So he says, now if you think about all these quotes that I just said, this is exactly what all those people that are speaking in opposition to me right now, that you're listening to, that you're saying here, he's saying, people are saying that it must be that he is untrue to the Buddha's will. So this popular belief, he's saying, is I hold up the sutra passages, and it says that all those people that are speaking ill of me are the ones that are the people that the sutra speaks of that are slanderous. Okay? Not me. Right? Now when I hold up this bright mirror of the sutra text and turn it toward the country of Japan, all is reflected there without the slightest obscurity. The forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of parched rags and living in retirement. Who are they? Those who are respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. Who are they? Is it me, Nichiren, the common priest? No. Okay? What I quoted you from the Lotus Sutra, that's Ryokan. That's those other guys. Okay? Those are the great priests that are being supported by the government, that are bringing all this on us, our country, making all of the gods leave the country. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. He's saying that's why all this bad stuff's happening. He says when ordinary people see them, they all suppose that they are true arhats and speak of them as great bodhisattvas. To whom does this refer? Nobody talks to me about me that way, right? He's talking about Ryokan and all those guys. Those who give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline but scarcely ever read or recite the sutras. Who are they? It's not me. That's all I do. All right? You get it? So he says, as we see from these passages of the scripture, the Buddha Shakyamuni observed with his Buddha eye the situation that would prevail at the beginning of the latter day of the law. If in the present age there were no persons of the type that he described, then the world-honored one would be guilty of false and baseless talk. And if that were the case, who would put faith in the theoretical and essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra and in the doctrine of the eternally inherent Buddha nature that was preached in the grove of sal trees? Do you understand what the grove of sal trees pertains to? Whenever you hear the grove of sal trees, talking about the Nirvana Sutra. Okay? So you're talking about the Lotus Sutra and the Nirvana Sutra, which are equated by Tentai as the perfect teaching, right? So, does everybody understand what he just said there? Mm-hmm. He's saying that who else does this describe? He's saying, does it describe those guys or does it describe me? When he's talking about the baselessness, the people that are slanderous, he's talking about them. But he's talking about the one that are upholding the law, even at the risk of their own life. He's talking about Nichiren. All right? So he's saying, if it weren't for me, everything that Shakyamuni said in the Nirvana Sutra, no one would have lived that. That would have been a great baloney. That would have been a great prevarication. My life is the only life that makes that prediction valid. Mm-hmm. Okay? And that's why my teaching is the correct teaching. It's validated by the Lotus Sutra. It's validated in the Nirvana Sutra. He says, now when, in order to prove the truth of the Buddha's words, I read these sutra passages and apply them to the country of Japan. I interpret them as follows. He says to Hikari, he says, I read these sutra passages and apply them to this country of Japan. I interpret them as follows. The passage about forest-dwelling monks who are living in deserted places refers to the priests of the Kinshoji, Jufuku-ji, Karaku-ji, Kinji, Kofuku-ji, and the other temples of the Zen, precepts, and Nimbutsu schools of Japan. These diabolical temples have appeared in the world in order to bring destruction upon the Buddhist temples of the Lotus or Tentai school of Mount He and other places. Now, why does he not mention true word there? He just now nailed Nimbutsu, precepts, and Zen. He left out true word. Why does he leave out true word? Understand that there is a distinction here. True word qualifies that the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavajrana Sutras are equal. But the Lotus Sutra is inferior in practice to the Mahavajrana Sutra because the Mahavajrana Sutra got all the mudras. Okay? So at least in the true word teaching, it still qualifies that the Lotus Sutra is a great, true, correct work. Whereas in Nimbutsu, Honen says discard, close, and abandon. Precepts is provisional, doesn't even get to the Lotus Sutra. Zen is a teaching outside of the sutra, has got nothing to do with anything Shakyamuni said. You get it? All right, so that's what he's talking about, the grove of the sal trees. Those who wear clothing of patched rags and give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline are the present-day observers of the precepts with their surplices made from 5, 7, or 9 pieces of cloth. Those who are respected and revered by the world and spoken of as great bodhisattvas are men like Doryu, Ryokan, and Shoichi. The world that looks up to them refers to the ruler of the nation and others like him in our present age. And the ignorant people and ordinary people are all the people of Japan, both high and low. Right? Because they reject my teaching and instead embrace the teachings of those other false teachers who are the second level of some of them are second level three powerful enemies. Some of them are, like Ryokan, are pretense of sages, right? So they're all representative of the three powerful enemies. Do you understand? Everything that he just discussed here, the lay believers and the priests themselves, all right? Because I am an ordinary person. In other words, again, I am an ordinary person. He's making that declaration. So none of those other previous passages applied to me. I am unable to believe in the Buddha's teachings. Because I am an ordinary person, I am unable to believe in the Buddha's teachings. But with regard to what I am saying here, I know the situation as well as one who knows fire or water when one touches one's hand to it. So what's he say there? He's saying in a self-deprecating way, he says, you may not consider me to be the same kind of expert on the scriptures of the sutras as one of these other guys, Ryokan or whatever. But I guarantee you, I'm capable of reading it better than they are. Okay? Because of this passages that I just reflected in the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras, my interpretation is the correct one. According to the scriptures, if a votary of the Lotus Sutra should appear, he will be cursed and reviled, attacked with swords and staves, and banished. Okay, so he's just now qualified. I'm the one that can make the correct interpretation. And then he now says what the Lotus Sutra says will happen to somebody that is a correct teacher. Do you understand? So he's qualified to Hikari. All of your doubts are understandable. This is the reason why it is this way, which is why I'm reading you this Gosho. And banished. But if one applies this passage of the sutras to the world today, not a single person is found whom it fits. Nobody else is taking persecution. No one else is being reviled for the teaching that they're propagating. They're all being more and more alms, more gold from the king, more gold from the court. Right? They're being completely supported. Who's out in the middle of nowhere? Me, Nichiren. Who then should be looked upon as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, he says. Based on these passages, it's me in the middle of nowhere that's actually living the life that makes them the votary of the Lotus Sutra, right? So he says, could it be that the enemies of the Lotus Sutra have made their appearance, but that no one exists who upholds the sutra? Like, could it be that the three powerful enemies came around, yet there's no votary for them to oppose? No. Nah, never going to happen. That's what he's trying to say to Hikiri. Who else could it be but me? I don't want to say it with my own lips because you'll think that I'm puffing myself up. But if we take a look at really what's occurring, this is the way I read the sutra. This is why I say what I say about myself. This is the same attitude each one of you should have as it relates to actual Ichinen Sanzen. There's nothing wrong with you saying you are the Buddha or believing and perceiving yourself to be the Buddha. That's what this whole teaching is leading you to. Okay? That's what Nichiren is qualifying right here. I've attained actual Ichinen Sanzen. That's what he's saying to Hikiri. He says, could it be that the enemies of the Lotus Sutra have made their appearance, but that no one exists who upholds the sutra? But that would be like saying that there is an east but no west, or a heaven that exists but earth does not. Were this the case, the words of the Buddha would be no more than lies, would they not? It would seem like self-praise on my part. But having pondered this, having really thought about this for many years, for a long time, how could it be me? How could it be me? If this is Buddha, how could I be the Buddha? This is the most difficult thing about the Lotus Sutra, is accepting that reality as being exactly as you are, instead of something that's going to be an improvement on exactly where you are. Even it may seem like self-praise, but it isn't self-praise on my part. But having pondered this, I will give credence to the words of the Buddha. I, the priest Nichiren, am the votary referred to in the scripture. Okay? That's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay? That's why I'm reading you this Go-Show. I go like, okay, grab that one. Straightforward, straight up. He says, I am the votary. I am the original teacher. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the law that's referred to by my original disciples in the Lotus Sutra. I'm now here in the latter day of the law to leave the correct object of devotion and the correct teaching for the 10,000 years and beyond of Mappo. Okay? So he says, I, the priest Nichiren, am the votary referred to in this scripture. Moreover, the Buddha, speaking of the events of a past lifetime, says in the Never Disparaging chapter, at this time there was a bodhisattva named Never Disparaging. They spoke ill of him and cursed him. Some among the group would take sticks of wood or tiles and stones and beat and pelt him. In this way, Shakyamuni Buddha cited in his own practice as a bodhisattva in the past to encourage and hearten the votary of the Lotus Sutra at the beginning of the latter day of the law. So, who was Never Disparaging in his past life? Shakyamuni. Who does Nichiren just qualify that Shakyamuni talked about a past life in order to encourage the votary in the latter day? So he's making a distinction. I'm not Never Disparaging, and I'm not Shakyamuni. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Read what he's saying here. He's saying, in the past, moreover, the Buddha, speaking of a past lifetime, of the events of a past lifetime, of the events of one of his past lives, right? He qualifies in the Never Disparaging chapter that Bodhisattva Never Disparaging was a previous existence of his own, right? He says, moreover, the Buddha, speaking of the events of a past lifetime, says in the Never Disparaging chapter, at this time there was a bodhisattva named Never Disparaging. They spoke ill of him and cursed him. Some among the group would take sticks of wood or tiles and stones and beat and pelt him. In this way, Shakyamuni Buddha cited his own practice as a bodhisattva in the past to encourage me at the beginning of the latter day of the law. Do you understand what he's saying? Because I'm going to have to go through all this shit, uphold my faith all the way to the last one of my life, and leave the teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo to be propagated for the sake of all mankind by my disciples. Do you understand? Okay. So, he says, in the past, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging was beaten with sticks and staves for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, and was at once able to attain the supreme stage of perfect enlightenment. Now I, Nichiren, for the sake of the same sutra, have in this lifetime been attacked with swords and staves, and have twice been banished to distant places. So the encouragement that the Buddha left for me, for my life, I have lived exactly according to the sutra once again, the never disparaging chapter as well. Can there be any doubt, therefore, that in the future I will attain the wonderful fruit of Buddhahood? After the passing of the thus come one Shakyamuni, the four ranks of bodhisattvas appeared in the former and middle days of the law and worked to propagate the Lotus Sutra. But even at those times they encountered numerous persecutions. The 20th of Shakyamuni's successors, Bodhisattva Aradeva, was killed, and the 25th, the Venerable Aryashima, had his head cut off. The 8th successor, Bodhimitra, and the 13th, Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, also carried a red flag and stood before the entrance to the ruler's palace in hopes of attracting his notice. The former for 12 years and the latter for 7. So great difficulty, great obstacles, great perseverance. Chu Tao Xing was banished to a mountain in Sushao. The priest Fatsu was murdered. The Tripitaka master Fatao was branded on the face, and the Dharma teacher Hui Hua Yin was berated and accused. The great teacher Tentai confronted in debate the leaders of the 10 schools of northern and southern China, and the great teacher Dingyo refuted the erroneous views of the 6 schools of Nara. So he's saying, like, all these dudes have had a hard time. Okay, it isn't just me, my brother. Depending upon whether these men lived in the time of a wise ruler or a foolish one, their views were accepted or rejected. Do you understand? It was all about what king was there to project the parent, teacher, and sovereign. What sovereign was there? But in no case were they untrue to the Buddha's will. Even during the former and middle days of the law, they encountered such persecutions. How much more likely, then, is one to meet persecutions in the latter day? For the sake of the Lotus Sutra, I have already met with the wrath of the authorities, but I count that as the greatest good fortune. It is like exchanging tiles and rubble for gold and silver. And yet I cannot help but grieve at the words of the benevolent King Sutra that once the sages have departed, then the 7 disasters are certain to arise. The 7 disasters include major droughts and great military uprisings, such as what they were going through right at the time in Japan that he's writing this letter, right? The Sovereign King Sutra states, because evil people are respected and favored, and good people are subjected to punishment, the stars and constellations, along with the winds and rains, all fail to move in their proper seasons. Now, who is meant by the evil people who are represented and favored? It is men like such as I spoke of earlier. And who is meant by good people who are subjected to punishment? It is the one whom I mentioned above, myself, who has again and again been banished. And the passage, and the stars and constellations, refers to the strange and portentous occurrences that have taken place in the skies and on the earth during the past 20 years or so. If these passages from the sutras are true, then the banishment of Nichiren is a portent that foretells the downfall of the nation, which ultimately occurred. Even before I incurred the wrath of the authorities, I foresaw that this would happen, and stated the reason on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land, the Risho and Kokoran. Who can doubt that what I say is true? And that is why I grieve. It has now been 2222 years since the passing of the Buddha. During the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, and others acted as the Buddha's envoys, propagating his teachings. However, they propagated only the 2 teachings of the Hinayana and provisional Mahayana, and did not propagate the teachings of the true Mahayana, the Lotus and Nirvana. Some 500 years after the beginning of the middle day of the law, the great teacher Tiantai appeared in China, refuted the erroneous views of the schools of the north and the south, and established the correct teaching. In the area of doctrinal study, he propagated the theory of the 5 periods. And in the area of the meditative practices, he set forth the concept of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, right? Based on the Makashikan, right? All of China joined in praising him as Little Shakyamuni. Okay, because he brought that kind of clarity. He finally made all this stuff that nobody could figure out and put in order. You remember he did all of that for the provisional teachings. He straightened everything out. That was all to qualify that the lotus was the highest. However, though he propounded perfect meditation and perfect wisdom, he did not spread the perfect precepts. Now, does everybody get? Do you understand the significance of that little sentence? Okay, let's go back. Think about all this stuff I've been teaching you. He says, all of China joined in praising him as a little Shakyamuni. Okay, so as another thus come one. However, though he propounded perfect meditation and perfect wisdom, he did not spread the perfect precepts. So, what would be the liability of that? Could not actually attain actual Ichinen Sanzen through his teaching, because the 3 great secret laws aren't there. The 3 great secret laws are precepts, meditation, and wisdom. Right? That's what's contained within the Buddhism of the sowing. He's saying Tintai didn't have those things. He only had the precepts of perfection, of wisdom, and meditation. Okay? So, understand that. He's qualifying this straightforward. He's saying, all of China joined in praising him as a little Shakyamuni. However, though he propounded perfect meditation and perfect wisdom, he did not spread the perfect precepts. Then, 1,800 years after the passing of the Buddha, the great teacher Dengyo appeared in Japan and refuted the erroneous views that had been held by the 6 schools of Buddhism during the 200 or more years since the time of Emperor Kime. And what is the great significance of Dengyo? What's the thing that Dengyo did that made him Dengyo? That made him actually fulfill a prophecy of the Lotus Sutra? What did he do that Tintai hadn't been able to do? The ordination platform on Mount Hay. Perfect precepts. That's what that ordination platform was all about. So even though Tintai brought about meditation and wisdom, Dengyo's the one that adds precepts. So even though it isn't the 3 great secret laws, it's as close as you can get in the former and the middle day of the law. Do you understand? So now you can attain Buddha. You can attain Buddhahood. Do you understand? So he's saying, now, in addition, he propounded the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment that Tintai had not yet spread. These are the great precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment administered at the ordination platform on Mount Hay. Nevertheless, in the more than 2,000 years since the Buddha's passing, though there have been tens of thousands of temples built in the 3 lands of India, China, and Japan, there have been no temples. Please stop. There have been no temples or pagodas dedicated to the Lord of the essential teaching, nor has anyone yet propagated the 5 characters of Myoho Rengekyo that were specifically entrusted to the bodhisattvas who emerged from beneath the earth as numerous as the particles of 1,000 worlds. Although scriptural passages exist saying that they should be propagated, they can be found nowhere in the land. Is this because the time and the people's capacity are not yet ripe? Okay, so do you understand what he just said there? Let's read it again carefully. He's saying that, so even though Tintai did what Tintai did, even though Dengyo did what Dengyo did, however, in all of this time, in these more than 2,000 years since the Buddha's passing, though there have been tens of thousands of temples built, all of them had an object of devotion in them, correct? He's saying, and built in the 3 lands of India, China, and Japan, there have been no temples or pagodas dedicated to the Lord. Okay, no temples or pagodas with the correct object of devotion, which is the Lord of the essential teaching, which is the teaching hidden in the depths of the essential teaching, 16th chapter Lotus Sutra. So the original teacher, there have been, what the Daishonin is qualifying is that in all this time, no one has ever erected a temple with the correct object of devotion, because the teaching that leads to the correct object of devotion has never been revealed until me. That's what he's saying. Nevertheless, in the more than 2,000 years since the Buddha's passing, though there have been tens of thousands of temples built in the three lands of India, China, and Japan, there have been no temples or pagodas dedicated to the Lord of the essential teaching, Nichiren, or the original teacher. Nor has anyone yet propagated the 5 characters of Myoho Rengekyo that were specifically entrusted to the bodhisattvas who emerged from beneath the earth as numerous of the dust particles of the 1,000 worlds. That's in the 23rd chapter, right? The entrustment chapter, where he goes, go, split, and they leave. They're not there for the last 5 chapters. You're right? You got it? Because their gig is the latter day of the law. All right, and those last 5 chapters have to do with encouraging people for the former and the middle, because we practice the Buddhism of the sowing. Although scriptural passages exist saying that they should be propagated, they can be found nowhere in the land. So I don't see bodhisattvas of the earth anywhere. Okay? All right? Is this because the time and the people's capacity is not yet ripe? Every other condition says that it is ripe. Right? So he's saying, they are my disciples. That's who those people were. The Buddha, speaking of the future, said, after I have passed into extinction, in the last 500-year period, which is the time frame he's in 13th century Japan right then, according to their understanding of when Shakyamuni died, you must spread it abroad widely throughout Jambudvipa and never allow it to be cut off. The great teacher Tentai predicted in the last 500-year period, the mystic way will spread and benefit humankind far into the future. And the great teacher Dingyo wrote, the former and middle days are almost over, and the latter day is near at hand. Now indeed is the time when the one vehicle of the Lotus Sutra will prove how perfectly it fits the capacities of all the people. So he says, Dingyo, he's asked the question here, is this because the time and the people's capacity is not yet ripe? And then he gives more scriptural, not my opinion, he says, not Nichiren's opinion. According to Dingyo, now is the time. So is this time not ripe? No, it is ripe. You get it? Moreover, a non-Buddhist of India once said, 100 years after I pass away, the Buddha will appear in the world. And a Confucian scholar predicted 1,000 years from now, the Buddha's teaching will be transmitted to China. Thus, even such predictions by ordinary persons are found to tally with the truth. How much more trustworthy, therefore, should be the pronouncements of such persons as Dingyo and Tentai, who I just quoted, to say nothing of the explicit predictions that came from the golden mouths of Shakyamuni and many treasures. Do you understand? Everybody understands where I'm at, right? So he's saying, Tentai and Dingyo predicted that what I'm talking about, that I'm doing right now myself, would occur. And he says, not only that, it was specifically predicted by Shakyamuni and reinforced by many treasures. Okay? So, you must understand this, he says. Do you all understand it? Because when he says you must understand this, every time you read that kind of a declarative in any of his letters, he's talking to you. Okay, he's saying you must understand this. What I've just been talking about. Is everybody with me? Yes. It's all very clear, correct? Yes. This is Nichiren. This is a Gosho. This isn't me talking. This is Nichiren talking. All right? You must understand this. The time has come for the Lord of the essential teaching, which in reality is Nichiren, whom has not yet appeared, to make his advent. Okay? So he's talking to somebody saying, this person, this entity, this teacher that's referred to in the Lotus Sutra has not yet made his teaching hasn't made its advent, but now is the time for it. So in other words, he's saying to him, again, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Me. That's what this is all talking about. And for the 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo, which have never before been propagated to be spread throughout Jampadvipa. Can any doubt exist? However, there are persons who have repeatedly heard about these matters from the priest Nichiren, and yet, now that I have met with these great difficulties, have abandoned their faith. You, on the other hand, have heard my teachings only once or twice, and then only for an hour or two. Even so, I have been told that you had not yet abandoned your faith, but continue to practice it. This cannot be due solely to causes formed in your present existence. Declarative statement. So he's saying, if you encounter Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and you don't blow it off, and you're suddenly curious and wondering, there's a reason that precedes this lifetime. He's saying it very clearly here. Understand, he's saying, even so, I have been told that you have not yet abandoned your faith, but continue to practice it. This cannot be due solely to causes. So you couldn't have just encountered this law for the first time. That's what he's saying. Even though this is the fifth 500-year period, and this teaching seems to have never been taught before, it has been taught before. It's the original teaching. You couldn't be responding to what you're hearing right now had you not already heard it before. That's why you're responding this way now. It's just not recorded in Earth history. Do you understand? Okay, so he says, this cannot be due solely to causes formed in your present existence. So it has to do with your past existence. The great teacher Myolo stated, therefore we know it is because of seeds planted in previous existences that in the latter age one is able to hear the law even for an instant, and having heard it, take faith in it. Okay? So it isn't because you heard the Buddhism of the sowing in the former or the middle day of the law, or at the time of Shakyamuni's life. Okay? Bodhisattvas of the earth are the original disciples. Disciples. You get it?
Yep.
All right. He also said, having been born at the end of the middle day of the law, I have been able to behold these true words of the sutra. Unless one has planted the mystic cause in a previous existence, they are truly difficult to encounter. Not even believe in, encounter. The Lotus Sutra says in essence that persons who in past existences have made offerings to 100,000 million Buddhas will be reborn in the human world and take faith in the lotus. Us, bodhisattvas of the earth. The Nirvana Sutra states in essence that persons who give alms to as many Buddhas as there are sands in the Vati and Ganges rivers will be reborn in the latter evil age and take faith in this sutra. King Ajatasattu was an evil man who killed his father and imprisoned his mother. Nevertheless, when he came to the assembly where the Buddha was preaching the Nirvana Sutra and heard the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, not only did he recover from the sores that had been broken out all over his present existence as a result of his evil deeds, but his life was prolonged by 40 years, and even though he did not originally possess roots of faith, in the end, he reached the first stage of security and was given the Buddha's prediction he would attain Buddhahood. So he came all the way back from having broken all the 5 cardinal sins to nailing a prediction of Buddhahood. Understand? So there's none of us that is doomed or stained, or, again, for us to even be reading this already qualifies who we really are. Okay, don't ever think of yourself as less than that, or you're saying that this is not true. Do you understand? Every time you deprecate your life as not being the Buddha, you're basically saying he's making this up. Yeah, the Lotus Sutra says in essence, Devadatta was a man of incorrigible disbelief. Thank you, Catherine. The worst of the entire land of Jampadvipa. In all the earlier sutras preached during the lifetime of the Buddha, he was cast aside as hopeless, but he encountered the Lotus Sutra and was granted a prediction that he would become a Buddha called the Thus Come One Heavenly King. Judging from these examples, we may conclude that for evil people living in the latter age, of the attainment of Buddhahood depends upon not upon whether their offenses are slight or grave, but solely upon whether or not they have faith in this sutra. Let me read that last sentence again. Judging from these examples, we may conclude that for the evil people living in the latter age of the attainment of Buddhahood depends not upon whether their offenses are slight or grave. Not whether they did really bad shit or not such bad shit, but solely upon whether or not they have faith in the sutra. In your case, you are a member of a warrior family, an evil man who day and night is involved in the business of killing. Since you have not yet left their household to become a priest, but have remained a warrior to the present, by what means can you escape the three evil paths? Should you not think about this very carefully? The heart of the Lotus Sutra is the... And so in other words, he's saying, don't worry about the fact that you're a warrior. Okay? If Devadatta could do it, you can do it in this lifetime. But you're going to have to think about what you're up to here. All right? So he's saying, this means that without casting aside one's karmic impediments, without becoming perfect or changing anything about you, okay, one can still attain the Buddha way. Thus, Tiantai said, the other sutras only predict Buddhahood for the good, but not for the evil. This Lotus Sutra predicts Buddhahood for all. And Myolo says, the meaning of the perfect teaching lies solely in the fact that those who oppose can be saved as well as those who follow. That's the true teaching. In the other three teachings, the fate of those two types of people is fixed. Although I should write something about whether or not the Buddha way can be gained in various degrees depending on the sutras preached prior to the Lotus Sutra, this is a matter to be discussed with someone thoroughly familiar with the Buddhist terms and categories. However, there are disciples to whom I have taught the essentials on this point. You should summon them and hear of the gist of the matter from them. At that time, I will write you further on the subject. They're saying you want to know about whether or not you can attain Buddhahood through the previous teachings prior to the Lotus Sutra. Go talk to Nico Shanin first. Get a little more before I start going heavy on you to tell you no. All right, everybody's with me?
Yes.
Have I still got time to start reading? All right, it's page 95, chapter 10. Let's get going so we can at least put some page numbers down on the video. All right, he says, page 95. Kosen Rufu.
Chapter 10.
Oh,
Let's get going so we can at least put some pages.
I've got feedback. Kosen Rufu is a struggle to spread the Lotus Sutra so that all people in the evil age of the latter day of the law can attain enlightenment. Everybody understands that, right? Widespread propagation, Kosen Rufu, is a struggle to spread the Lotus Sutra, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, so that people in Mappo, the latter day of the law, can attain Buddhahood in their present form. That's what that first sentence actually says. Obstacles and devilish forces of every imaginable kind are sure to assail the votaries of the Lotus Sutra who take up this challenge. In particular, the three powerful enemies will appear without fail as a concrete manifestation of the devilish nature inherent in life. Precisely by battling and triumphing over these formidable enemies, however, we can attain Buddhahood in this lifetime and make Kosen Rufu a reality. The greatest persecution that befell Nichiren Daishonin in his efforts to spread the law, an onslaught that saw the three powerful enemies attack him on an unprecedented scale, was the Tatsunokuchi persecution and the Sato exile. But ultimately, none of these devilish forces arrayed against him could bring about his demise. The Daishonin says, I survived even the Tatsunokuchi persecution. Not only had he surmounted countless other hardships in the course of his endeavors, but he had triumphed, he declares, in this most harrowing persecution in which the authorities had tried to execute him. Actually had him on his knees with the swordsman ready to cut off his head. Even though the devil king of the sixth heaven, the personification of fundamental darkness, had mobilized forces possessed by evil demons, arrogant lay people, arrogant priests, and arrogant false sages, the three powerful enemies, and tried to eliminate Nichiren by killing him, and destroy Kosen Rufu, widespread propagation of the true teaching, the devil king could not succeed. Now, I added some things in there while I read it. The triumphant life condition of the Daishonin, who had won over every attack by these malevolent forces, is nothing short of a manifestation of his true identity as the Buddha of limitless joy, enlightened since time without beginning. Jiju Yushin Norai of Kuanganjo. All right? In the opening of the eyes, so that's the Buddha of beginningless time. That's the original Buddha. You got it? All right, that's the original teacher. That's the Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, thus come one. All right? In the opening of the eyes, so far, the Daishonin has discussed various passages from the Treasure Tower, the 11th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, and the Devadatta, the 12th chapter, to demonstrate that he is the sutra's votary in the latter day of the law. Next, he turns his attention to the 20-line verse section regarding the three powerful enemies in encouraging devotion, the 13th chapter. Having personally battled these daunting adversaries, he concludes that he himself is the votary of the Lotus Sutra of the latter day. All right? Now again, when we talk about the votary of the Lotus Sutra of the latter day, we are specifically speaking of the original teacher, the Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, thus come one. Is there a separation between the life of the original teacher and our life? No. No. There is no separation. It's because of that original teacher's Buddhahood that opened the way for Buddhahood for all. Okay? And as bodhisattvas of the earth, we're his original disciples. We're the original disciples of that original teacher. I say his, there are no genders involved here. Do you understand? All right, so in encouraging devotion, the 800,000 million Nayutas of bodhisattvas, so that's a ton of people, right? That's a ton of living beings. Respond to Shakyamuni's 5 proclamations, the 3 pronouncements of the Treasure Tower chapter. We already know what that is, right? 3 times he says, you got to go do this in the 5th 500-year period. And the 2 Devadatta, okay, evil people and women, right? And the 2 admonitions of the Devadatta chapter, by pledging to spread the Lotus Sutra after his passing. And in the course of making that vow, they describe the 3 powerful enemies. That's that 20-line verse section from the 13th chapter. It could be said that the Treasure Tower and Devadatta represent the decree of the mentor, while the encouraging devotion expresses the vow of the disciples. Do you understand how that could be? Okay. Who's doing the professing during the Treasure Tower and the Devadatta chapters? It's Shakyamuni, right? Yes. But encouraging devotion is the disciples. That 20-verse line comes from the disciples. Okay? So he's saying one is the mentor, the 13th is the disciples. That's what he's saying. Characterize and perceive it as such. Yes. Okay? He says, in any case, to win over obstacles and devilish functions is the true path of mentor and disciple, dedicated to accomplishing Kosen Rufu in the latter day of the law. Everybody's with me? All right? So everything that is said in the encouraging devotion chapter, in the Devadatta chapter, in the Treasure Tower chapter, all apply to our lives right now. The opening of the eyes is a paean of victory. Awed, this is reading from the Gosho, awed by the 5 proclamations the Buddha made in the Treasure Tower and Devadatta chapters, the countless bodhisattvas promised the Buddha that they would propagate the Lotus Sutra as described in the encouraging devotion chapter. Everybody's with me? Yes. I will hold up this passage, 20-line verse section of the sutra, like a bright mirror, so that all may see how the present-day priests of the Zen precepts and Nimbutsu school and their lay supporters are guilty of slandering the law. And again, why is this significant of him qualifying that these guys are slandering? Don't forget, up until this point in time, the prevalent perception was that any path will take you there. It doesn't matter if it's precepts or it's Zen or it's true word or it's Nimbutsu. They're all teachings of the Buddha. They'll all get you to the Buddha way, because where does the Buddha way lead? To the Buddha land. A 10th world off someplace where you've met perfection, right? All of this is a teaching to say that that's an expedient means. So he says, on the 12th day of the 9th month of last year, 1271, on the occasion of the Tatsunakuchi persecution, between the hours of the rat and the ox, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., this person named Nichiren was beheaded. It is his soul that has come to this island of Sado, and in the 2nd month of the following year, snowbound, is writing this to send to his close disciples. This description of the evil age in the encouraging devotion chapter seems terrible, but one who cares nothing about oneself for the sake of the law has nothing to be frightened about. So what's that sentence talking about? We care nothing for ourselves but seek only the Buddha way. Right? That's from the encouraging devotion chapter, right? And he's saying that is the thing that inspired his life to be able to reveal his teaching. His willingness to not hold back. His willingness to forsake even his life. Do you understand? So he's saying, others read it will be terrified. Okay? Okay. He says, the description of the evil age in the encouraging devotion chapter seems terrible. Okay? Like if you read that 20-verse line, it sounds like everybody's going to be out to get you, right? So it might be something that you could read and you would have like trepidations. You would have, ooh, do I really want to do that? He says, but one who cares nothing about oneself for the sake of the law, one who is seeking Buddhahood, has nothing to be frightened about, because one will protect and be protected from and defeat these 3 powerful enemies, even though you encounter them. They're not going to kill you. They're not going to defeat you. They haven't defeated me. This is his whole point. Do you understand? I even escaped Tatsunakuchi. You can't see it yet, Kikiri. But my name is going to go down for thousands of years. My philosophy is going to be propagated throughout the whole... He doesn't know any of that for sure when he's writing any of this, right? But it all has come to pass. He says, but others reading it will be terrified. Okay? But my disciples won't be. My disciples won't be. My disciples will understand that I have left them the clear, bright mirror of my own life, so that they'll understand what they encounter when they encounter it. They won't become frightened. They won't be concerned. They will have faith. And they will, like me, defeat these 3 powerful enemies. As is predicted, they will. Which, as is promised, they will. Okay? He says, others reading it will be terrified. This scriptural passage is the bright mirror, the Shakyamuni, many treasures in the Buddhas of the 10 directions, left for the future of Japan, and in which the present state of the country is reflected. 2nd column, page 96, last paragraph. At the beginning of his discussion on the 20-line verse section, the Daishonin explains the significance of his undergoing the Tatsunakuchi persecution. In other words, he starts by revealing his state of life in having vanquished the 3 powerful enemies. Because what's he do on the way to Tatsunakuchi? What's he do on the way to Tatsunakuchi? He stops at the shrine of Hachiman and says, dude, these guys are about to do their worst, and if they pull it off, you will have not upheld your vow to protect the votary in the latter day. And your heads, I'm going to go straight to Eagle Peak, and I'm going to rat you out. You're going to have your head split in 7 pieces. That's what he's saying here, right? He's saying, in other words, he starts by revealing his state of life in having vanquished. His state of life is that I am the Buddha. You cannot beat me. You can try. Come on. See, if you can cut my head off, go for it. Okay? That's why when Shijo Kingo's crying, these are your final moments, he's going like, dude, if they could do this, then forget everything I've said. It isn't real. They're not going to be able to do this. That's what freaked them all out to the point that they didn't. This guy's nuts. I want out of here. Somebody else kill him. All right? It is a declaration of spiritual triumph. Isn't it? Nobody can beat me. That's mugiwashi. This important passage signifies that the opening of the eyes as a whole can be viewed as a paean of victory, as a written instruction on how to always win. In writing, this person named Nichiren was beheaded. He is declaring that his status up to that time, in which he conducted himself as an ordinary person, came to an end at Tatsunokuchi. Okay? The Daishonin is indicating here that at Tatsunokuchi, he cast off his transient status and revealed his true identity. This is no longer what I think, this is what I know. He uses the word soul to refer to that true identity of the original teacher, the original votary. The Buddha of limitless joy, enlightened since time without beginning. Jiju Yushin Nurai of Kuanganjo. His soul, he says, has come to Sado. This represents a declaration of his state of life, his towering resolve from his place of exile to henceforth, as the original Buddha of the latter day, to take the lead for widespread propagation of the mystic law. Why? Because I'm going to go right the opening of the eyes. I'm going to go right the selection of time. I'm going to go right the object of devotion for observing the mind. I'm going to go right the things that I'm not worried about saying, I am the thus come one Nichiren. I'm going to make that clear now. I'm not going to worry about what these dudes are going to try and do to me because they already tried and they didn't pull it off. Okay? It refers to,
He continues.
He continues, Nichiren, in the second month of the following year, snowbound, is writing this to send to his close disciples. The Daishonin began composing the opening of the eyes immediately upon arriving at Tatsunokuchi on Sado Island, at Tsukahara on Sado Island in early November 1271, and completed it in February 1272. So it's over a year. Okay, the close disciples to whom he sent this treatise specifically refers to Shijo Kingo, who was the recipient, who with the spirit of not begrudging his life had accompanied Nichiren during the Tatsunokuchi persecution. But in a broader sense, it refers to all who had followed and fought alongside him up to that point. Next, the Daishonin says, the description of the evil age in the encouraging devotion chapter seems terrible, but one who cares nothing about oneself for the sake of the law has nothing to be frightened about. Others reading it will be terrified. The first sentence is a statement of encouragement that although what is described may appear frightening, there is in fact nothing to fear. Certainly, the persecutions by the three powerful enemies predicted in encouraging devotion are frightening. But once we understand the essence of the devilish forces behind these persecutions, it becomes obvious that what is truly terrifying is the devilish nature inherent in human beings. In this treatise, however, the Daishonin, having risked his life to fight for Kosen Rufu and subsequently triumphing over all obstacles and devilish functions, displays an indomitable spiritual state. Thus he says, there is nothing to fear, not even amidst the most terrible persecution or hardship caused by devilish functions. The spirit to battle powerful enemies is the heart of the Lion King. As long as we possess the readiness and courage to confront these negative forces, we can manifest our inherent Buddhahood and bring forth the necessary fighting spirit, wisdom, and life force to achieve victory. For that reason alone, we have nothing to fear. Accordingly, there is nothing to be frightened about, expresses the heart of the Daishonin, the Lion King, and his disciples, the Lion King's cubs, who fight alongside him with the same selfless spirit. Others will be terrified. Meanwhile, refers to the hearts of those who do not practice with an unbegrudging spirit and who are in danger of abandoning their faith out of cowardice. Does everybody understand what he means by that?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what it means. What's he mean by that? It means they can't take the shit. It means there's no mugiwashi in there. It means that they got discouraged because they didn't get the benefit they chanted for. That's what he's talking about.
Yes.
Okay? He's saying others will be terrified. Meanwhile, refers to the hearts of those who do not practice with an unbegrudging spirit. What's an unbegrudging spirit? Do not begrudge your life. Right? It's not terrifying for those who do not begrudge their life, right? Nothing to be frightened about. But one who cares nothing about oneself for the sake of the law has nothing to be frightened about, right? So that's what he's talking about. And who are, okay, who do not, and who are in danger of abandoning their faith out of cowardice. In other words, Nietzsche was concerned that people who lack firm resolve and commitment in faith would read the passage about the three powerful enemies and the encouraging devotion and be overcome by fear and apprehension. Cowardice is a state in which people have succumbed to inner devilish functions, because that's what's going to attack you. That's what's going to try and defeat you. That's what's going to keep you from chanting the necessary daimoku to win. This can progress to such a profound level that they eventually lose their vitality and wisdom and even find their whole lives tumbling inexorably toward defeat, even if they've been chanting. The Daishonin sternly warns that we should not let this happen to us. Ultimately, unless we undertake the same resolve as our mentor in faith, we will be defeated by devilish functions. This is why the Daishonin's call to his disciples to rise into actions and vow equal, with a vow equal to his, resonates throughout this treatise. Done. Okay, we'll start on page 98 under a bright mirror reflecting the present state of the country next week, and then after that I'll read that 10 pages from the sutra, and then hopefully I'll be able to finish by reading Persecution by the Sword and the Staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.